Hello, and welcome. I'm Mehran Khalili. We are DM25, a radical political movement for Europe, and this is another live discussion with our coordinating team featuring subversive ideas you won't hear anywhere else. And today we are talking about what happened here in Greece. Last week, tragedy struck. 2 trains collided late on Tuesday night in the north of the country, claiming at least 57 lives, mostly students traveling from the capital back to university. Greece is in mourning. This, the worst ever train accident in the country, happened ostensibly because a single station master forgot to flip a switch. Indeed, the Greek Prime Minister's initial reaction was to blame the accident on human error, but that doesn't even scratch the surface. Greece has long had the most dangerous rail network in the EU. It operates a system that literally relies on manual controls, a system that's plagued by poor working conditions and chronic understaffing. And there had been many warnings that a tragedy was around the corner, from unions, from independent journalists in Greece, from the European rail authorities. And these warnings were met every time with indifference. But the roots of the problem go even deeper, all the way to Brussels and beyond. At the height of Greece's debt crisis, the EU and the country's other creditors masterminded a sell-off of public assets. The state-owned train operator was sold for just 45 million euros to an Italian company. That company has since failed to invest in the network, providing trains that other countries use for scrap, while taking 50 million a year in euros in subsidies from Greek taxpayers. So what's going on here? How can we unpeel the layers of this tragic story? How do the waves of privatization of public services across Europe impact the state's ability to provide basic needs and keep citizens safe? And how can we prevent tragedies like the Greek rail disaster from happening again? Our panel, including the leader of Mehran25 in Greece, Yanis Varoufakis, and Erik Edman, now the spokesperson for Mehran25 in Greece, together with our crew of activists and policy experts, will be weighing in on this question. And you out there, if you've got thoughts, comments, concerns, rants, anything you want to say, throw at us, please put them in the YouTube chat and we'll put them to our panel. Now, let's hand it over to Yanis. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Mehran. There is going to be a series of investigations. We at DM and Mehran, we don't need an investigation. We've already provided the report on the most authoritative investigation before the accident happened. Not with a bit of hindsight. On 22nd of September, last September, Kriton Arsenis, one of our members of parliament, stood up in Greece's parliament and looked at the minister responsible for public transport and told him, in no uncertain terms, I'm quoting verbatim, the Athens to Thessaloniki railway is the unsafest railway in Europe. We are going to mourn victims if you continue doing nothing about upgrading it and upgrading its safety features. That was last September. On the previous July of 2022, again, Kriton Arsenis had highlighted the unsafety, the lack of safety features of the whole gamut of our rail system, what is left of it, because most of it is derelict and simply doesn't function. A month before that, or so, I think it was May 2022, another of our members of parliament, Kleon Grigoriadis, had done something very similar. He had risen in parliament, addressing the government to relate to government ministers an experience that he and I had the previous night. We had paid a visit to a railway maintenance depot in the heart of Athens, a depot that houses about 30 maintainers, engineers of the railway and metro system of Greece, who had invited us to go and see with our own eyes the decrepitude of the equipment that they had to work with. In that particular depot, we were told, there used to be, up until 2 years ago, 64 engineers and maintenance staff. Today, there are 30. They have to work 7 days a week, simply because if they don't, the trains won't operate. They showed us the tools of the trade that had to work with, from small pieces of equipment to large railway carriages that house maintenance equipment. The point that we're making was that it was all breaking down and it was not being replaced. And when the tools that they had to work with broke down, they were forced to improvise, to create their own substitute tool they could weld together. Of course, you can imagine that these tools had no certification. They were actually breaking the law by using them, but management didn't leave them any alternative. So, in other words, Mehran 25 in Parliament on 4 different occasions, I mentioned 2 or 3, but there were 4 occasions, we warned the government of what was coming. We do not need an inquiry to tell us what happened. Now, of course, there is a larger story there. There is a story of Greece's bankruptcy 13 years ago, which plunged investment, especially public investment, into a black hole. A 13-year-long bankruptcy, which was perpetuated massively and exemplified and reinforced by the policies of the lenders of the infamous Troika. But it's not just that. There is neoliberal ideology as well. In the year 2010, just as Greece fell into the bankruptcy hole, the European Union demanded of the Greek government, as part of its Thatcherite model, of breaking up public utilities and then privatizing the fragments. That was the Margaret Thatcher model. This is how she broke down the electricity grid and power stations in the United Kingdom, and then later on, British Railways. A small aside, just to confirm the pertinence of the link-up that I'm making. In the 1990s, the private completed by the Tories and then the Labour government of that Tory presenting himself as a Labourite. You remember a fellow called Tony Blair. It was completed in 1997, 2 years later, in Paddington, close to the Paddington railway station. There was a almighty tragic accident claiming 31 lives. The Royal Commission that was convened after that clearly pointed a finger at this combination of the breakdown, the fragmentation of the railway system, dividing the railway tracks from the rolling stock to create supposedly some kind of pseudo quasi-market. That's the neoliberal mantra. And demonstrated that it was this privatization, initially the breakup, and then the privatization of British Railways that led to 31 people dying and many, scores of people injured. This is exactly what happened in Greece. Only it was worse. Let me share with our audience and you, comrades, my personal experience when I was Minister of Finance. When I moved into the Ministry of Finance on end of January 2015, I inherited a 1,300-page list of commitments that the previous government had made to the Troika. It was essentially the longest death certificate of a nation. In it, we had the privatization of water, of electricity, of the railways, of our ports, of our airports, the takeover of all public assets by the lenders, the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank, and the European Commission on behalf of the world's oligarchy. It was an awful, awful document, which of course I was never going to implement. That's why I was elected. That's why our government was elected, not to implement it. But the number one priority I had as a Minister of Finance of a bankrupt country was to haircut, to extinguish a significant part of our public debt to the international financiers and to the Troika. Because when you owe money that can never be repaid, you're a slave. And if that entity is not a person, it's not a company, but it is a state, then that is a vassal state. It is a state that is essentially in a debtor's prison owned by the international financial private and public community, oligarchs, crows, okay, vultures, I should say. I should never call them a community. They don't deserve that. So my number one priority was to get rid of the debt in order to create the degrees of freedom that were necessary for a sovereign government, a democratically elected government, to do everything else that they needed to do in order to look after public goods, human beings, education, hospitals, the economy, and so on. So my strategy was concentrate on the debt restructure, a deep debt cut. And when it came to all the other bits and pieces that were inside that litany of evil, that program of effectively destroying everything, to slow them down, to throw spanners in their works. So when they were coming to me, they were saying, oh, okay, here's a commitment, your previous government has signed it, to give 14 of your most lucrative airports, including Mykonos, Chania, Santorini, amazingly profitable airports, to give it to a German company called Fraport. Yeah, I would say, hang on a second, give me a specification of how much money they would invest in it, where the money would come from, trying to slow them down. Same with the ports, same with the railways. When they said, oh, we are, the previous government has committed and we have a plan, that's the Troika speaking, as if they own the country. We have a plan to give them to an Italian company, FS, Ferrovie dello Stato, which is, state railways. I would point out that FS is bankrupt. I said, look, we have a bankrupt railway system. Now, where is the logic in giving it to an Italian bankrupt company? Where is the money going to come from in order to invest in modernizing it, in making it safe? And essentially, I was playing one potential buyer against the other to gain time. But what was fantastically interesting was that these Troika people were simply uninterested in any discussion that involved technical issues, safety, investment, speed, efficiency. And while I was talking about investment, about, modernization and so on, they looked, their face beamed boredom. They were just bored. They didn't want to talk about technical issues, safety issues, economic issues, let alone social issues. But, they were supposed to be technocrats who didn't want to talk about technocratic stuff. And at some point, they explained to me why they were bored. They said, Yanis, look, we've already agreed amongst ourselves. Your airports will go to Fraport. Your port of Piraeus will go to Costco. And your trains will go to the Italians. And then we've decided, why are you wasting our time? That was their attitude. And, by the way, a little aside, have you noticed that all three companies are state-owned? So Fraport, which took our airports in the end, is a nationalized German state-owned company. Costco, that took over the port of Piraeus, is even legally, a state-owned Chinese company. And FS is a fully owned, 100% owned company by the Ministry of Finance of Italy, which of course doesn't have 3 pennies to rub together in order to invest in Greece's railways, right? It's a joke that the bankrupt Italian state is investing in the Greek railways. right? So it was nationalization. It wasn't even privatization. It was nationalization by the wrong states. So the Chinese state took the port, the German state took the airports, and the Italian state took our railways and put no money in it at all. Even in the airports, you know. I mean, if you go now to Greek airports, if you fly into, you know, Santorini, Mykonos, Chania, Thessaloniki, you will see that the airports are very nicely refurbished. Don't get fooled. This is not money that the German company Fraport put into it. They didn't put in €1. Do you know where the money came from? From Greece's structural funds, from the European Union. Now, this is not just crony capitalism, it's mafia capitalism. It's not even capitalism, it's just mafia feudalism. Not even techno-feudalism, mafia feudalism. That's what it is. So the Italians got the trains. Now, of course, they didn't take the tracks. The tracks remained the property of the Greek state. This breakdown, this fragmentation, one broken down bankrupt company, state company, maintains the tracks with half, or actually 40% of the personnel they used to have, and the rolling stock is given to a bankrupt company, FS from Italy. Now, proof that they are bankrupt and that they have absolutely no sense of responsibility is that FS, after all they've had the Greek Railways now for 7 years. They brought some new trains onto Greece, except they are not new. They are 35-year-old trains that are banned in Central Europe as unsafe. So, you know, you have this marriage of a bankrupt Greek state company owning the tracks and a bankrupt Italian company owning the ancient imported locomotives. It's going to lead to a bloody disaster. And it is a disaster which, unfortunately, has the imprint, the paw marks of all three major parties, New Democracy and PASOK, who started this ball rolling, and of course, Syriza, my former comrades, who after my departure, after my resignation, said yes to everything that the Troika was telling them to do. And in 2017, it was they who privatized the Greek railways. So this is a crime of omission and a crime of commission perpetuated by the political personnel here in Greece that said yes to the lenders, to the creditors, to the Troika, and of course by the Troika. You see, this is what happens when a country like Greece, Sri Lanka, Argentina, whoever, goes bankrupt. The vultures fly over the land and pick the flesh from the rotting corpse of the country. They took the airports, they took this, they took that, they put nothing in, right? And now we have the corpses of 57 of our own, men and women, mostly young people, who are being buried as we speak, with a government that knows no compunction whatsoever, does everything with impunity. Think about it. The Prime Minister, on the first day, went up to near the scene of the crash and said that he will leave no stone unturned until a proper commission of inquiry finds out what happened. And in the same sentence, gives us his verdict. It was human error. I wanted to say to him, Mr. Mitsotakis, you are a human error, your parents and your social classes, and we have to suffer you. I didn't, because politeness prevented me from doing that. I'm sharing this with you. And then 2 days later, they decided to sideline any parliamentary committee whose job, according to the Constitution, should be to investigate the accident, and to appoint a three-man, it's International Women's Day, let's make that pun or point as well. 3 men were appointed, 3 experts. One of them was a gentleman whose previous job, if you look at his CV, includes 7 years of overseeing the breakup of our railways and their privatization. So it's like asking a mafia boss to investigate a mafia crime. There's no other way of deciding it, of expressing it. And now for some good news, because we need to pierce this darkness with a few rays of hope. Young people out there have been energized by this. They're outraged. I've never seen, since 2015, such fervor, such rational and creative anger, such logical rage amongst the young. The police are attacking them. Erik has been attacked himself as part of our Mehran block. You've seen the photographs. This is going to escalate. And it's escalating at a time when we're moving towards elections. There were rumors that we would be having the elections next month. Now that election is going to be pushed into the summer. This is very bad for us because it means that the government has succeeded in disenfranchising the young. Because when young people take jobs in the summer to work in the tourist industry, from Athens they go to Crete, or from Thessaloniki they go to Rhodes to work in a godforsaken job, 7 days a week, no time off, for a pittance of money. It's very hard for them to return to their place of residence in order to cast a vote. We don't have postal votes in Greece. So essentially, we are going to lose something like 500 to 600,000 young people who will be disenfranchised by pushing the elections into the summer. This suits Mitsotakis and the regime down to the ground. They're very happy with that. I always suspected they would push the elections into May, June, July. Now they have an excuse for doing it. So, sorry for going on and on and on, but I could be talking, as you can imagine, for 5 hours about this. Their death must not be in vain. We must never forget that there is a criminal here. It is the international oligarchy and their policy of fragmenting public networks and privatizing them. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanis. Erik, please give us your take and also your view from the streets where people are protesting. There's a general strike call for tomorrow.
That's right, yeah, and of course we'll be there just as we were in the last two demonstrations. Look, I'm a kid of the Indignados movements. That's where I sort of cut my teeth politically, and I agree with Yanis 100% in that I have the kind of people that I saw at Syntagma on Sunday when we were there are people I have not seen on the streets of Greece for a good 10 years, since 2013, 2014. It's families, it's young people, it's people who are not politically organized around parties, around associations, around unions. It's citizens who have not been activated politically for a very long time. They've been going through this kind of political depression, if you like, since Syriza's betrayal back in 2015. And I saw them with us for the first time in a very long time. And I think that's indicative of the fact that the political scene in Greece is shifting, and people who have not been voting, who have not been engaged, are returning slowly. I don't want to be overly optimistic, but there's definitely a shift there that I think is important to note. Now, about the broader situation, Yanis has essentially said it all. Of course, the rail network in Greece was in no way a healthy infrastructural element of the country, even before the economic crisis. It's been systemically undermined by certain political interests in the country, large-scale infrastructure construction contractors who are responsible for building motorways, for operating the tolls of those motorways, automotive lobbyists and the rest of it, big interests who are invested in ensuring that the railways in Greece remain in an appalling state so that people prefer to travel in other ways. That's one thing. And just as an aside, the Minister of Transport and Infrastructure in Greece, Mr. Karamanlis, resigned. The previous minister, the one who was in the ministry at the time of the accident. And the person who replaced him, Mr. Yerapetritis, is, I kid you not, the son-in-law of the CEO of one of the biggest construction contractors of the country, Yekterna. Now, in most, if not all other countries, that would have been considered, an impossibility. You cannot maintain a person like that at this political position. And yet in Greece, it's just another Tuesday, right? So we also have our own internal issues. The state of politics in the country is really appalling. And the kind of things that people take for granted, and this is very much the result of this political depression that we're going through. Everybody's the same. And you don't know where to look first. It's a kind of Trumpian political approach where you're just bombarded with scandals, and by the time you've assimilated one, this moved on to scandal number 38. So it's impossible to keep up with these sorts of things, and yet we are trying to bring these things to the surface. Something that is not very easily done when the vast majority of the media in the country are invested in making sure that these kinds of scandals don't see the light of day. So it's very much fighting an uphill battle, but fight it we must. One more thing about the role of the European Union and of the European Commission. Yanis said what really needs to be said. But our current government has an incredibly bipolar relationship with the European Union. On the one hand, they pretend to be their most loyal subjects and bend the knee to the vast majority of EU instructions, whether they are, sort of the results of bailout agreements, the kind of austerity measures that are being imposed on Greece and the rest of it, or whether it's, using the country as essentially a shield towards the waves of refugees and migrants who were trying to make their way to Europe. All of that is fine and dandy. It's also fine to accept, the austerity that Yanis said is destroying the infrastructure of the country, or selling off people's houses so that funds from the United States and elsewhere can buy up people's homes, leaving them leaving them homeless. Another instruction of Europe. But when the interests of Greece's oligarchy is threatened, for example, the ship owners that we have here, their ability to transport Russian oil, that was the first time Mr. Mitsotakis' government vetoed a decision of the European Council. Or indeed now, literally yesterday, we had a subcommittee of LIBE. LIBE is the committee of the European Parliament responsible for human rights and liberties in the European Union. They had created back in May of 2022 a committee to investigate the state of the rule of law in Greece when the scandal came out first for the what's it called, the spy scandal, the spyware scandal in the country. And since then, a bunch of other scandals have come to be added to the story, whether it's the rule of law more broadly, or the freedom of speech and the freedom of press. These have all been added to the agenda of this subcommittee, and they made their way to Athens yesterday, even though the government of Greece has systemically been trying to undermine their work in Brussels while they were still in Brussels. And they tried to stop them from coming to Athens, saying that, firstly, we're in public mourning, and it wouldn't be seemly for the committee to join us at this time. And then yet Mr. Yerapetritis, the minister I mentioned earlier for transport and infrastructure, went as far as to say that the visit of the committee in Greece would essentially be undermining the election results of the elections that we have this year. It would essentially be the European Union trying to influence the electoral results of a member state. Now, these are the kind of statements that we're used to coming from, Mr. Orban in Hungary. And we've been screaming our lungs out that the urbanization of Greece has been happening for the past few years, and we're seeing it now in practice. So it's an incredibly bipolar relationship. And then on top of it all, the European Commission, which had sent Greece to the European court because of the state of the infrastructure of our railways 3 weeks ago. They sent us to court to answer for the kind of disastrous state our railways are in. Apparently, they don't think that the kind of policies that they were pushing for have anything to do with that. It's something for the Greek state to answer to. So this European Commission now is suggesting through Ursula von der Leyen, that the president of the Commission, to send over a team of experts to help us upgrade the infrastructure of our railways with ideas. Now, we're not missing ideas, we're missing the resources to implement those ideas, that the real resources have been taken away from the Greek state systemically through these kinds of policies of austerity, which have taken the elements of the Greek railways that are the most profitable, namely the transportation of passengers, given that to private capital, and then leaving the Greek state with a bill. It's the Greek state that has to pay for the infrastructure maintenance, so these private companies can continue making money on Greek railways. So it's the perfect picture of hypocrisy on all sides, on the side of the state, of the government, on the side of the Commission. And we're trying to really delineate and to separate these things and try and present people with the reality, which is the fact that what New Democracy has been doing for the past 4 years is not running the country. They've been slowly building a network of corruption, connecting judges, connecting the media, connecting oligarchs into one network of corruption, which they are now engaging in order to hide the fact that they have not been acting as a government for the past 4 years, but as a plunderer of the country, and not even for themselves, a plunderer for these oligarchs. And that is the only thing that they've been doing since this crisis began, since this tragedy happened last week. They've just engaged this network in order to hide the truth.
Thank you, Erik. And that transport minister that you just referenced there, who resigned as a result of this tragedy, I should add that he's the nephew of the four-time Greek prime minister, ex-prime minister, and cousin of one more recent prime minister. And he's also announced that he's going to be running in the next elections.
And let me add, one of the people working for him was the son of one of the highest ranking judges in the Supreme Court of Greece, who is now being asked to investigate this tragedy. So it's all connected.
As much as I hate to echo Trump, it might be time to drain the swamp. Two comments from the chat. One from George Iliopoulos. He proposes that we should fund independent research groups and communities in contrast to legislative and politically corrupt forensic researchers. And Daniel Aitchison says it's ridiculous how the airports and other infrastructure have been sold off. It's the same in the UK. UK train companies, UK train costs provide profits and subsidize French railways. They are gangsters in all but name. Julijana Zita from Germany. What's your take?
Thank you, Mehran. Well, first of all, I really hope that people understand that these politicians are not just incompetent. It's not just a matter of making a wrong decision, but they are actually working against the people in their interest, in their oligarchs' interest, but in the same in the same breath against the people. And I don't think they care about the consequences. I don't think they care about the dead people, and my condolences to the families, of course. But I think it's really fundamental. It's an ideological, it's a philosophical question that we have to ask ourselves as a society or European-wide here, because with the title of this live stream, it's fitting, privatization kills, but it doesn't only kill people's lives, but it kills like the way the society runs. Like nothing functions properly anymore. Also, all these strikes all around Europe are not just coming from somewhere. It's the same it's the same topic. And sadly, even if companies are not privatized, they are run by the governments, especially neoliberal governments, social democrat governments, conservative governments. They run the infrastructure by the same business model as a private company would. They cut wages, they don't invest, they don't maintain what they should maintain. I mean, if you see like the Deutsche Bahn here in Germany, it's a joke. It's for the last 25 years, they have not built new railroads. The trains are getting worse. The materials of the trains getting worse. They fired a lot of people in the past years. Now they lack personnel, but nobody wants to work. Now with the inflation, the wages are way too low. It's just the question is about the way of living that we want to have. And I think it's really time for the public to realize that we need a new model for infrastructure in general. We need to have some sort of democratic say in what's happening to public goods. And we have to take back certain assets of the infrastructure and run them in different ways. I think there is a good example in Germany. I think hopefully Johannes will mention it later, of new ways to think about how public goods can be run together with the public and in their hands. And I think with Greece, it's so unfortunate that there was a democratic decision against this whole wave of privatization, and it didn't matter at all. Like it was last year in Berlin, they had this election about expropriating the housing company, and the government, the last thing they wanted to do was that. So they had like 57% of people in Berlin saying we should do that because we lack housing, we don't have space to live anymore. And we had a social democratic green government, and they said no way, we're going to do that. And this shows like it's not just that these assets are gone from public space, but it's really difficult to get them back if the politics are working against you as the people. So I really hope, like Erik said, he witnesses in Greece, that there is a kind of change of mood with the people, that this happens also in the rest of Europe, because we will suffer consequences in the future in other countries as well. It's a slow process, but there will be harsh consequences in the end. The more this privatization gets further, and the more we let those politicians play with all these things that are crucial for our lives, a monopoly game. Yeah.
Thank you, Julijana. Amir Kiyaei, our policy coordinator.
Thanks, Mehran. And of course, our hearts go out to the families and loved ones of the victims in this tragedy. Julijana made some good points early on, and in our Green Needle for Europe program, there's we've envisioned really a way for public ownership and democratic say in not just transport, but also energy and housing and other aspects of importance to life, if you like, and those are all laid out, and even to the extent of making public transport free to some extent, even is possible. Estimations for the Netherlands are around 4 billion euros a year to make public transport completely free in the whole country. So the sums are not that much, and it's never really an issue of money. As we all know, funds are available depending on political will. But let's just quickly backtrack to what was being said earlier on, and we continue to see that the politics of the day is seeking to maximize profit, and we saw that as well before this tragedy in Greece, in East Palestine, Ohio, that derailment, which everybody has, of course, seen, the massive, it looked almost like an atomic bomb had gone off, and the toxic spill and so on. According to leaks in the media, employees that were on that line were pressured to disregard repairs, since repairs take time and trains under repair don't generate profit. And it's not just the public transport infrastructure that is under pressure. We see this in the National Health Service in the United Kingdom, where continuous underinvestment is costing a lot of lives each week. And this is according to the British Medical Association, that has estimated approximately 500 people die every week due to delays in emergency care in the United Kingdom. So these numbers are, we're not talking a few, we're talking about hundreds and thousands of lives. And this is not just, and let's quickly move to the Netherlands again, Shell and ExxonMobil, which are involved in gas extraction in the Groningen fields, have been extracting way too much gas, from the ground. And the authorities have been aware since 1993 that there's a link between gas extraction and earthquakes. And we're not talking about one or two earthquakes. This is almost 1,600 earthquakes have been recorded in Groningen. And the government has been complicit and silent because, again, this is, as we keep mentioning, we know where the interest of our governments are. And just coming back to the money issue early on, that's, when the political will of the oligarchy is aligned with the politics, money becomes available. Even in Greece, the military spending has increased by 60% over 2019 to 2022, it's now almost 4% of GDP, spending more than the United States when measured in that way. But it doesn't actually have to be that way, though. And the logical rage that's spreading throughout Europe, the protests, the strikes, the people coming out, can be organized and must be organized so that we can avoid unnecessary debts to our friends and families, loved ones and colleagues. And look, it took maybe centuries, and not yet in all countries, of course, but it took centuries to separate the church and states, and we really need separation of business and the state to happen a lot sooner if our species is to see the 22nd century.
Thank you, Amir, and thank you for mentioning the East Palestine. I think it's pronounced tragedy in the US. Our opposition to privatization, I mean, it's not an ideological opposition. Am I right? Just to play the devil's advocate here. What does a healthy model of privatization look like for you? I don't know if you want to take that, Amir, or maybe it's something for the rest of you also to think about. Yanis has got his hand up. Maybe I can squeeze you in before Ivana. Yanis.
When it comes to public goods and networks, our opposition to privatization is analytical, ethical, political, and ideological. There can be no such thing. I've already made this point in one of our live streams from this channel. There can be no such thing as a market for electricity. I remember my really very simple argument. There's one wire coming out of the wall. So it's going to be a monopoly one way or the other. Governments try to simulate markets, but in the end, all they create is an oligarchic cabal, which sucks the energy from society, energy in metaphorical terms. Similarly with railways. A railway cannot be privately run and safe and efficient and a source of good. The idea that you will have one company running the tracks and then the operators of different rail companies are going to compete on the same track. Who gets the 1 o'clock in the afternoon or 8 o'clock in the morning ride Who gets that? Yeah, because this is when people actually want to use the train to go to work or to go shopping, right? There's going to be one train. You're not going to have 20 parallel tracks with passengers choosing which 8 o'clock in the morning train to take, right? So by definition, the 8 o'clock train is going to be a monopoly. And if you have privatization, it's going to be a private monopoly. And who gets that? Well, the oligarch with the clout. That's who gets it. And they will cut corners. They don't care about the rest of the system. It is impossible to have a proper timetable. Remember, those of you who know the United Kingdom, at the time of the transition from the publicly owned and run uniform British Railways to that disaster of hodgepodge of a system that came out of privatization, it was impossible to plan your trip from, let's say, London to Stoke. Because, if you had to make a change, the two companies running the two different trains could not coordinate, or they would, change the second train would never wait for you if the first train was late. So our opposition to public goods and networks being privatized is non-negotiable. Now, I'm not against the idea of a company which is not producing a public good and it is not networked, not being publicly run. But speaking for myself, as an anti-capitalist, I would like it to operate on the basis of one employee, one share, one vote. Because the alternative, capitalist ownership of the means of production, generates a host of crises and inefficiencies. We haven't made that system of effective modern cooperative work yet. Yugoslavia was a good example with very interesting experiments, multiple experiments, some of which worked very well, but that self-management, cooperative-based economy was snuffed out, both by the Soviet Union on the one hand and the West on the other hand, especially Western bankers that lent them a lot of money. And then once interest rates blew up to 20%, all these Yugoslavian companies died, with the result being the war in Yugoslavia. Anyway, I think I've answered the question.
Thank you, Yanis. Two related comments from the chat. From Mohammed, competition is not the same as efficient. And Carl, large corporations are inefficient by definition. Ivana Nenadovic, Serbia. Floor is yours.
Thanks, and it's a perfect timing because Yanis gave me this cue to connect with Yugoslavia, or your previous question, Mehran, is there a successful privatization? I haven't seen it because Serbia, as the last country of ex-Yugoslav republics, entered this transition, which was supposed to transform our system from ancient, old, and non-functional and non-profitable, quote unquote, to a more profitable, private, as it should be, as it's in the West. That's what we were promised. We are still not out of this transition 23 years later, and the transition meant that all of the public goods will be privatized. And literally from A to Z, everything Yanis and Erik said that was happening in Greece was happening in Serbia as well. These companies that once hired thousands of workers and took care of their part of the job in the name of the state. So somebody was accountable and responsible for the infrastructure of the country and the safety and so on. Now it's divided to private company, which is just a cover for some mafia brother or godfather or some member of the mafia cartel that is running the country. And there are small sub-companies that are then running separate parts of the business. And you have this effect on the society that Julijana was talking about, because once hired workers with workers' rights, union rights, and benefits became 0-hour contract hired workers that are at the end of the chain blamed for the human error, which is a consequence and unfortunately not the cause. What I wanted to mention here, and it's a lucky coincidence, I guess, that we were talking about, Yanis mentioned these negotiations in Brussels, which were never negotiations because they didn't want to listen. And also when we think that our governments or representatives are going to negotiate, they're not. And on this day, 3 years ago, we released EuroLeaks, which is the proof of everything Yanis is saying. And none of our politicians will tell you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivana. And yes, that privatization model of breaking up public companies into many different, I mean, the case of the train operator, one company has the tracks and another the carriages, another the ticketing. Whenever tragedy strikes, that system also makes it very easy for people to pass the buck and say, well, no, it was their fault, it was their fault, it was their fault, which is kind of what happened here in Greece with the lack of train safety over recent years. Okay, Johannes Fehr from Germany. Floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, yeah, solidarity to all the victims of this tragedy and the comrades and people in Greece who are, fighting now back and trying to change something. We're with them. And I think there is this privatization, neoliberalism politics have been going on in many states in many different ways over the last years. Also in Germany, as Julijana has been mentioning. For example, in Berlin, and I want to come back to something that she has been mentioning, in Berlin in the early 2000s, mainly a lot of state-owned housing was sold off by a center-left government to private business that now runs a lot of the housing in Berlin as profit making. And I think also there, in the end, the saying that privatization kills in this case is kind of true, because every winter on Berlin streets, there's homeless people freezing to death. And the state and the society is not run in a way that we kind of provide something that is also limited here and should be in public, run in a way that is, that's distributing the space of living in a city like Berlin evenly and fairly among people, and run it effectively, not in terms of making money, but providing what's important, a warm house for everyone. And I want to shortly present something that the expropriating campaign here in Berlin that was successfully run and supported by almost 60% of the people and is not implemented by the government, of course, to expropriate a lot of these companies that once were public, then were sold off. And now all these companies that have more than 3,000 flats should be brought back into public ownership. And the campaign that we also supported with Mehran 25, of course, because it's very much in line with our policy as well. They developed a model for Berlin, how to manage this public housing. And it is not just giving it back to the state, because also in Berlin, there's existing state-owned housing companies that are run with, this kind of way of trying to make a profit and try to run them like a private company, which is also something that lets the tenants and the people suffer. So their model is to actually bring together as the people managing and overseeing the running of these of the housing, the management, by first of all, of course, the tenants in system of local councils, regional councils, sending off 5 people into an overall council that is also, besides these 5 people, brought in by the tenants, run by 4 people brought in by the workers that work for the housing companies to have their interest reflected in the management of the whole association, and as well by society in large. So society in large also elects 4 people, and only 2 people are brought in by the government. So you have in the end a council of 13 people that is run by the tenants, the workers, and the wider society, and a little bit also by the government. And with this, I think this is a model, one example. Of course, you can imagine different examples for railway companies who can be have kind of different interests that you need to reflect when you put them into in a kind of ownership that is made sure that it's run by the people for the people. Thanks.
Thank you, Johannes, for sketching out that solution. 2 comments from the chat from Yabitz. Systems that deprive a worker of their sense of ownership and pride in their workmanship must be phased out. And phosphorescence on the oligarchy says that the oligarchy is no longer invested in the democratic model. It's no longer aligned with their current or future interests. Therefore, they're becoming increasingly authoritarian. Who do we have up next? Dusan Pajovic, our campaign coordinator from Montenegro.
Basically, I don't have much to say. I have rather a question to ask. It's about economy, so probably best suited for Yanis, but anyone else is also more than welcome to answer. Listen, I'm not an economist, so if I say something illogical, don't shoot me. But my question basically is, should national strategic key points, and by definition monopolies such as railway, be managed as one person, one share, or just nationalized in so-called ordinary way? If the first one is the case, as I would prefer it as well, but then I have a lot of doubts, such as what percentage of dividends in such a monopoly should be allocated back to the society. In that case, should the transportation be free on the other side? Where does the money come from if it's free? And if it's from the other sources, how to set up a voting system on salaries in that company, if it's the free but dependent on other sources. At the same time, if it's standalone, then it's a lot of money and a lot of salary and so on. I don't know if you get me on that one.
Of course. Can I answer that, Mehran?
Yep, please go.
Look, the brief answer is that if it is a natural monopoly and it is an essential, it's a public good, it should not be down to one member, one vote. It should be a nationally run network, which, however, I don't want to see being governed, managed by government. We do not want to replace the oligarch with a bureaucrat. That's the last thing we want to do. So the idea of supervision of a board of governors to which management is answerable and which selects government, management, that is, however, selected on the basis of sortition, random draws from a pool of experts, representatives of local communities of society, so that you have neither capital nor the state running the system. That's what I think we should be aiming at. This is the view of Mehran 25 in Greece. This is part of our policy. And you see, it's not just natural monopoly, because you may have a natural monopoly in pink pencils. Who cares? Let there be a natural monopoly in pink pencils. And if you feel exploited, if you really want a pink pencil, I really don't give a damn. But when it comes to what we call in economics, public goods, a public good is not something that is provided by a public utility, right? It could be a public, when you privatize the railways, railway transport is still a public good, even if it's privatized. The definition of a public good is a good whose consumption does not only affect the person who consumes it, but it then affects through externalities the rest of society. So a bus service, a railway service, is a public good because when all of us take it, then this is good for the environment. This is good for congestion. It means we need to build fewer roads, destroy, fewer lithium mines or the vicinity around the lithium mine in case of electric cars. So when it comes to public goods, this is not just a matter of the employees, one person, one vote, one share. That's when society needs to have a say in how it's run, because there's a very good, for instance, case for saying that it is in the interest of society, the economic interest of society, that this service is subsidized. So I believe, for instance, that in a good society, railways must be subsidized if they do not make ends meet, or at least some of the railway. I mean, if you go to Switzerland, a very rich country, they're very capitalistic in their thinking. There are trains going everywhere, all the time. And most of those routes are not economical in the sense of private profit making. They don't cover enough from ticket sales. But it is, Swiss society that has decided that it wants to have a railway system that functions all day and all night, because otherwise they will have to buy lots of cars and build lots of railways and destroy the Alps. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Yanis. Let's close with Julijana Zita, because we're at the top of the hour. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, what I wanted to add, actually, Yanis closed on that point, that what I really miss, and when it comes to infrastructure, also European-wide, is exactly that it doesn't have to follow the logic of profit. I mean, I looked at the map of Europe and I'm like, why can I not take a train from Frankfurt to Athens? Exactly. Because of a lot of things that we discussed today, and also because of what Ivana explained once to me, what happened to the main station in Belgrade, and that the train cannot pass there anymore, that there is no infrastructure which people can really enjoy and which makes sense for people's lives, rather than having an infrastructure that is for profit for this company and this company or this state. But, and also in the face of climate change, we need to do these things. So why not do them with joy and ambition as a human society, to say, we want to have trains everywhere in Europe. We want to have clean energy. We want to have, to demand things rather than just to accept or to minimize the damage, or to make the best out of what it is. But to have really ambitious projects in Europe, and to have a little bit of vision and fantasy when it comes to how this continent can look like. And I think that would be really great if we can come to a point as a society where we think about these things and about all these structures like that, and not just, to minimize collateral damage. And I think that can only happen if people have a say, if people get asked what they need and what they want in their lives. And to extract more ideas also from everywhere, not just concentrate on having some experts in governments. Maybe they do a good job, maybe they don't do a good job. But I think that the model also that Johannes talked about, to have, like mixtures of people from society, from governments, from scientists, to work on projects. I mean, this is really like science fiction at this point where we stand. But I think it's good to have a dream, and I would like Europe to be a continent that, has projects which are really good for everyone in the society, and with high quality.
Thank you, Julijana. And we've gone past the top of the hour, but if you would like to join us in bringing about the kind of world that Julijana is describing and addressing some of the problems that we've seen here today, there's a simple address. It's dm25.org/join. I should note also that on Thursday, because the cause of exposing power, we've talked about EuroLeaks, a project that we did a couple of years ago, exposing power, but Julian Assange is the definitive exposer of power, and he, well, not him unfortunately, but his wife and all of us here will be at the Trianon Cinema in Athens on Thursday for the premiere of the documentary about his case. So if you're in Athens, then please do join us there. It's free to join. And again, thank you very much for your questions and comments, all you out there. And once again, our hearts go out to the victims of this terrible tragedy in Greece. And in the meantime, good luck and stay safe.